The next morning, Thomas, the bellboy, brought me the Herald and a bit of news. The church next door had been sold. I thanked heaven for it. Not that being a Catholic I had any repugnance for the congregation next door, but because my nerves were shattered by a blatant exhorter, whose every word echoed through the aisle of the church as if it had been my own room, and who insisted on his R's with a nasal persistence which revolted my every instinct. Then, too, there was a fiend in human shape, an organist, who reeled off some of the grand old hymns with an interpretation of his own, and I longed for the blood of a creature who could play the doxology with an amendment of minor chords, which one hears only in a quartet of very young undergraduates. I believe the minister was a good man, but when he bellowed, "And the Lord said unto Moses, the Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name. My wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword," I wondered how many centuries of purgatory it would take to atone for such a sin. "Who bought the property?" I asked Thomas. "Nobody that I knows, sir. They do say the gent what owns this 'ere Hamilton Flats was looking at it. He might be a-buildin' more studios." I walked to the window. The young man with the unhealthy face stood by the churchyard gate, and at the mere sight of him the same overwhelming repugnance took possession of me. "By the way, Thomas," I said, "who is that fellow down there?" Thomas sniffed. "That there worm, sir? He's night watchman of the church, sir. He makes me tired a-sittin' out all night on them steps and lookin' at you insulting like. I'd a-punched his head, sir. Beg pardon, sir." "Go on, Thomas." "One night a-comin' home with Harry, the other English boy, I sees him a-sittin' there on them steps. We had Molly and Jen with us, sir, the two girls on the tray service, and he looks so insultin' at us that I up and says, 'What you lookin' at, you fat slug?' Beg pardon, sir, but that's how I says, sir. Then he don't say nothin', and I says, 'Come out and I'll punch that puddin'-head.' Then I opens the gate and goes in, but he don't say nothin', only looks insultin' like. Then I hits him one, but his head was that cold and mushy it'd sicken you to touch him." "What did he do then?" I asked curiously. "Him? Nothin'." "And you, Thomas?" The young fellow flushed with embarrassment and smiled uneasily. "Mr. Scott, sir, I ain't no coward, and I can't make it out at all why I run. I was in the 5th Lancers, sir, bugler at Tel el-Kebir, and was shot by the Wells." "You don't mean to say you ran away?" "Yes, sir, I run." "Why?" "That's just what I want to know, sir. I grabbed Molly and run, and the rest was as frightened as I." "But what were they frightened at?" Thomas refused to answer for a while, but now my curiosity was aroused about the repulsive young man below, and I pressed him. 3 years' sojourn in America had not only modified Thomas's Cockney dialect, but had given him the American's fear of ridicule. "You won't believe me, Mr. Scott, sir?" "Yes, I will." "You will laugh at me, sir." "Nonsense." He hesitated. "Well, sir, it's God's truth, that when I hit him he grabbed me wrists, sir, and when I twisted his soft, mushy fist, one of his fingers came off in me hand." The utter loathing and horror in Thomas's face must have been reflected in my own, for he added, "It's orful, and now when I see him I just go away. He makes me ill." When Thomas had gone, I went to the window. The man stood beside the church railing, with both hands on the gate, but I hastily retreated to my easel again, sickened and horrified, for I saw that the middle finger of his right hand was missing. At 9 o'clock, Tessie appeared and vanished behind the screen with a merry, "Good morning, Mr. Scott." When she had reappeared and taken her pose upon the model stand, I started a new canvas, much to her delight. She remained silent as long as I was on the drawing, but as soon as the scrape of the charcoal ceased and I took up my fixative, she began to chatter. "Oh, I had such a lovely time last night. We went to Tony Pastor's." "Who are we?" I demanded. "Oh, Maggie, you know, Mr. White's model, and Pinky McCormick. We call her Pinky because she's got that beautiful red hair you artists like so much, and Lizzie Burke." I sent a shower of spray from the fixative over the canvas and said, "Well, go on." "We saw Kelly and Baby Barnes, the skirt dancer, and all the rest. I made a mash." "Then you have gone back on me, Tessie." She laughed and shook her head. "He's Lizzie Burke's brother, Ed. He's a perfect gentleman." I felt constrained to give her some parental advice concerning mashing, which she took with a bright smile. "Oh, I can take care of a strange mash," she said, examining her chewing gum. "But Ed is different. Lizzie is my best friend." Then she related how Ed had come back from the stocking mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, to find her and Lizzie grown up, and what an accomplished young man he was, and how he thought nothing of squandering $50 for ice cream and oysters to celebrate his entry as clerk into the woolen department at Macy's. Before she finished, I began to paint, and she resumed the pose, smiling and chattering like a sparrow. By noon, I had the study fairly well rubbed in, and Tessie came to look at it. "That's better," she said. I thought so too, and ate my lunch with a satisfied feeling that all was going well. Tessie spread her lunch on a drawing table opposite me, and we drank our claret from the same bottle and lighted our cigarettes from the same match. I was very much attached to Tessie. I had watched her shoot up into a slender but exquisitely formed woman from a frail, awkward child. She had posed for me during the last 3 years, and among all my models she was my favorite. It would have troubled me very much indeed, had she become tough or fly, as the phrase goes, but I never noticed any deterioration of her manner, and felt at heart that she was all right. She and I never discussed morals at all, and I had no intention of doing so, partly because I had none myself, and partly because I knew she would do what she liked in spite of me. Still, I did hope she would steer clear of complications, because I wished her well, and then also I had a selfish desire to retain the best model I had. I knew that mashing, as she termed it, had no significance with girls like Tessie, and that such things in America did not resemble in the least the same things in Paris. Yet, having lived with my eyes open, I also knew that somebody would take Tessie away someday, in one manner or another, and though I professed to myself that marriage was nonsense, I sincerely hoped that, in this case, there would be a priest at the end of the vista. I am a Catholic. When I listen to High Mass, when I sign myself, I feel that everything, including myself, is more cheerful, and when I confess, it does me good. A man who lives as much alone as I do must confess to somebody. Then again, Sylvia was Catholic, and it was reason enough for me. But I was speaking of Tessie, which is very different. Tessie also was Catholic, and much more devout than I, so, taking it all in all, I had little fear for my pretty model until she should fall in love. But then I knew fate alone would decide her future for her, and I prayed inwardly that fate would keep her away from men like me, and throw into her path nothing but Ed Burkes and Jimmy McCormicks. Bless her sweet face. Tessie sat blowing rings of smoke up to the ceiling and tinkling the ice in her tumbler. "Do you know that I also had a dream last night?" I observed. "Not about that man," she laughed. "Exactly. A dream similar to yours, only much worse." It was foolish and thoughtless of me to say this, but you know how little tact the average painter has. "I must have fallen asleep about 10 o'clock, I continued, and after a while I dreamt that I awoke. So plainly did I hear the midnight bells, the wind in the tree branches, and the whistle of steamers from the bay, that even now I can scarcely believe I was not awake. I seemed to be lying in a box which had a glass cover. Dimly I saw the street lamps as I passed, for I must tell you, Tessie, the box in which I reclined appeared to lie in a cushioned wagon which jolted me over a stony pavement. After a while I became impatient and tried to move, but the box was too narrow. My hands were crossed on my breast, so I could not raise them to help myself. I listened and then tried to call. My voice was gone. I could hear the trample of the horses attached to the wagon, and even the breathing of the driver. Then another sound broke upon my ears like the raising of a window sash. I managed to turn my head a little, and found I could look, not only through the glass cover of my box, but also through the glass panes in the side of the covered vehicle. I saw houses, empty and silent, with neither light nor life about any of them excepting one. In that house a window was open on the first floor, and a figure all in white stood looking down into the street. It was you. Tessie had turned her face away from me and leaned on the table with her elbow. "I could see your face," I resumed, "and it seemed to me to be very sorrowful." Then we passed on and turned into a narrow black lane. Presently the horses stopped. I waited and waited, closing my eyes with fear and impatience, but all was silent as the grave. After what seemed to me hours, I began to feel uncomfortable. A sense that somebody was close to me made me unclose my eyes. Then I saw the white face of the hearse driver looking at me through the coffin lid. A sob from Tessie interrupted me, She was trembling like a leaf. I saw I had made an ass of myself and attempted to repair the damage. "Why, Tess," I said, "I only told you this to show you what influence your story might have on another person's dreams. You don't suppose I really lay in a coffin, do you? What are you trembling for? Don't you see that your dream and my unreasonable dislike for that inoffensive watchman of the church simply set my brain working as soon as I fell asleep?" She laid her head between her arms and sobbed as if her heart would break. What a precious triple donkey I had made of myself, but I was about to break my record. I went over and put my arm around her. "Tessie, dear, forgive me," I said. "I had no business to frighten you with such nonsense. You are too sensible a girl, too good a Catholic to believe in dreams." Her hand tightened on mine, and her head fell back upon my shoulder, but she still trembled, and I petted her and comforted her. "Come, Tess, open your eyes and smile." Her eyes opened with a slow, languid movement and met mine, but their expression was so queer that I hastened to reassure her again. "It's all humbug, Tessie. You surely are not afraid that any harm will come to you because of that." "No," she said, but her scarlet lips quivered. "Then what's the matter? Are you afraid?" "Yes, not for myself." "For me, then?" I demanded gaily. "For you," she murmured, in a voice almost inaudible. I care for you." At first I started to laugh, but when I understood her, a shock passed through me, and I sat like one turned to stone. This was the crowning bit of idiocy I had committed. During the moment which elapsed between her reply and my answer, I thought of 1,000 responses to that innocent confession. I could pass it by with a laugh. I could misunderstand her and assure her as to my health. I could simply point out that it was impossible she could love me, but my reply was quicker than my thoughts, and I might think and think now when it was too late, for I had kissed her on the mouth. That evening I took my usual walk in Washington Park, pondering over the occurrences of the day. I was thoroughly committed. There was no back out now, and I stared the future straight in the face. I was not good, not even scrupulous, but I had no idea of deceiving either myself or Tessie. The one passion of my life lay buried in the sunlit forests of Brittany. Was it buried forever? Hope cried no. For 3 years I had been listening to the voice of hope, and for 3 years I had waited for a footstep on my threshold. Had Sylvia forgotten? No, cried hope. I said that I was no good. That is true, but still I was not exactly a comic opera villain. I had led an easy-going, reckless life, taking what invited me of pleasure, deploring and sometimes bitterly regretting consequences. In one thing alone, except my painting, was I serious, and that was something which lay hidden, if not lost, in the Breton forests. It was too late for me to regret what had occurred during the day. Whatever it had been, pity, a sudden tenderness for sorrow, or the more brutal instinct of gratified vanity, it was all the same now, and unless I wished to bruise an innocent heart, my path lay marked before me. The fire and strength, the depth of passion of a love which I had never even suspected, with all my imagined experience in the world, left me no alternative but to respond or send her away. Whether because I am so cowardly about giving pain to others, or whether it was that I have little of the gloomy Puritan in me, I do not know, but I shrank from disclaiming responsibility for that thoughtless kiss, and in fact had no time to do so before the gates of her heart opened and the flood poured forth. Others who habitually do their duty and find a sullen satisfaction in making themselves and everybody else unhappy might have withstood it. I did not. I dared not. After the storm had abated, I did tell her that she might better have loved Ed Burke and worn a plain gold ring, but she would not hear of it, and I thought perhaps as long as she had decided to love somebody she could not marry, it had better be me. I, at least, could treat her with an intelligent affection, and whenever she became tired of her infatuation, she could go none the worse for it. For I was decided on that point, although I knew how hard it would be. I remembered the usual termination of platonic liaisons, and thought how disgusted I had been whenever I heard of one. I knew I was undertaking a great deal for so unscrupulous a man as I was, and I dreamed the future, but never for one moment did I doubt that she was safe with me. Had it been anybody but Tessie, I should not have bothered my head about scruples, for it did not occur to me to sacrifice Tessie as I would have sacrificed a woman of the world. I looked the future squarely in the face and saw the several probable endings to the affair. She would either tire of the whole thing or become so unhappy that I should have either to marry her or go away. If I married her, we would be unhappy, I with a wife unsuited to me, and she with a husband unsuitable for any woman. For my past life could scarcely entitle me to marry. If I went away, she might either fall ill, recover, and marry some Eddie Burke, or she might recklessly or deliberately go and do something foolish. On the other hand, if she tired of me, then her whole life would be before her with beautiful vistas of Eddie Burkes and marriage rings and twins and Harlem flats and heaven knows what. As I strolled along through the trees by the Washington Arch, I decided that she should find a substantial friend in me anyway, and the future could take care of itself. Then I went into the house and put on my evening dress, for the little, faintly perfumed note on my dresser said, "Have a cab at the stage door at 11, and the note was signed Edith Carmichael, Metropolitan Theater. I took supper that night, or rather we took supper, Miss Carmichael and I, at Solari's, and the dawn was just beginning to gild the cross on the Memorial Church as I entered Washington Square after leaving Edith at the Brunswick. There was not a soul in the park as I passed along the trees and took the walk which leads from the Garibaldi statue to the Hamilton apartment house, but as I passed the churchyard I saw a figure sitting on the stone steps. In spite of myself, a chill crept over me at the sight of the white puffy face, and I hastened to pass. Then he said something which might have been addressed to me, or might merely have been a mutter to himself, but a sudden furious anger flamed up within me that such a creature should address me. For an instant I felt like wheeling about and smashing my stick over his head, but I walked on, and entering the Hamilton, went to my apartment. For some time I tossed about the bed, trying to get the sound of his voice out of my ears, but could not. It filled my head, that muttering sound, like thick, oily smoke from a fat-rendering vat or an odor of noisome decay. As I lay and tossed about, the voice in my ears seemed more distinct, and I began to understand the words he had muttered. They came to me slowly as if I had forgotten them, and at last I could make some sense out of the sounds. It was this: "Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign?" I was furious. What did he mean by that? Then with a curse upon him and his, I rolled over and went to sleep, but when I awoke later I looked pale and haggard, for I had dreamed the dream of the night before, and it troubled me more than I cared to think. I dressed and went down into my studio. Tessie sat by the window, but as I came in she rose and put both arms around my neck for an innocent kiss. She looked so sweet and dainty that I kissed her again and then sat down before the easel. "Hello, where's the study I began yesterday?" I asked. Tessie looked conscious, but did not answer. I began to hunt among the piles of canvases, saying, "Hurry up, Tess, and get ready. We must take advantage of the morning light." When at last I gave up the search among the other canvases and turned to look around the room for the missing study, I noticed Tessie standing by the screen with her clothes still on. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Don't you feel well?" "Yes." "Then hurry." "Do you want me to pose as I have always posed?" Then I understood. Here was a new complication. I had lost, of course, the best nude model I had ever seen. I looked at Tessie. Her face was scarlet. Alas, alas! We had eaten of the tree of knowledge, and Eden and native innocence were dreams of the past. I mean, for her. I suppose she noticed the disappointment on my face, for she said, "I will pose if you wish. The study is behind the screen here where I put it." "No," I said, "we will begin something new." And I went into my wardrobe and picked out a Moorish costume which fairly blazed with tinsel. It was a genuine costume, and Tessie retired to the screen with it, enchanted. When she came forth again, I was astonished. Her long black hair was bound above her forehead with a circlet of turquoises, and the ends curled about her glittering girdle. Her feet were encased in the embroidered pointed slippers, and the skirt of her costume, curiously wrought with arabesques in silver, fell to her ankles. The deep metallic blue vest, embroidered with silver, and the short Mauresque jacket, spangled and sewn with turquoises, became her wonderfully. She came up to me and held up her face, smiling. I slipped my hand into my pocket, and drawing out a gold chain with a cross attached, dropped it over her head. "It's yours, Tessie." "Mine?" she faltered. "Yours. Now go and pose." Then with a radiant smile, she ran behind the screen and presently reappeared with a little box on which was written my name. "I had intended to give it to you when I went home tonight," she said, "but I can't wait now." I opened the box. On the pink cotton inside lay a clasp of black onyx, on which was inlaid a curious symbol or letter in gold. It was neither Arabic nor Chinese, nor, as I found afterwards, did it belong to any human script. "It's all I had to give you for a keepsake," she said timidly. I was annoyed, but I told her how much I should prize it, and promised to wear it always. She fastened it on my coat beneath the lapel. "How foolish, Tess, to go and buy me such a beautiful thing as this," I said. "I did not buy it," she laughed. "Where did you get it?" Then she told me how she had found it one day while coming from the aquarium in the Battery, how she had advertised it and watched the papers, but at last gave up all hopes of finding the owner. "That was last winter," she said, "the very day I had the first horrid dream about the hearse." I remembered my dream of the previous night, but said nothing, and presently my charcoal was flying over a new canvas, and Tessie stood motionless on the model stand.